Okay, thanks Wojtek for presenting, and thanks for having me here in Brno. So my lecture is about public space transformations. All right, so first of all, I think it's interesting to know who my audience is, and I'd like to know who here in the audience is an architect or architect student or in planner. So if you could raise your hand. I think it's the most of the people are. I think this is pretty crucial because usually, well, first of all, architects, we don't have to convince them about all these ideas of the public space. So that's, in one way, that's not so good, but in the other way, the architects can inspire the other people can inspire other people to continue with these thoughts. So I'll go right to my project. So we're here today. This is where we are now. And I'd like to do a memory exercise. So try and imagine in your head, I don't know if a lot of people here are living here for quite a long time, but if you can imagine, if you can remember how this place was maybe in 2009, 2008, try and imagine if you can remember how it was. It was like this, all full of cars. And now it's like this from the other angle. And it used to be like this. No trees and really car. So the current situation is a pretty, a very nice public space, very comfortable for sitting, and a place where you can really feel the people of the city. And just around the corner, there's the Jostova, the street, which looks like this. And actually it was really car-based. So I don't know if you can remember, because what I find usually is that people have short memory. So once they get, like, once something is being changed, they may complain, but some period afterwards, they already get used to it, and they can't even remember how it was before. So, I mean, today it's like this, and it's a very people and transport place. So, I mean, people at this space here, they can't really imagine. I don't know if you can remember how it was, like it was all full of cars, but today it's so dominant with the trams and the people that just can't imagine how cars would fit there. So I'd like to talk about Street View, because I really love Street View. This is in Avenida Paulista in Sao Paulo, where I live. So I live in that white building there, actually, in this avenue, and I'm addicted to Street View. So I use Street View as a tool, a research tool for studying configuration of the public space. But also, if we look at the top right, there's it's called the time machine function of the Street View, and you can see other years which the images have been taken. So in this case, we can see the image in 2011, and the existing image. You can see there's a bicycle lane, bicycle path in the middle, and you didn't. In 2011, there was no path. And that's how it started. My before and after project started actually as a kind of a hobby that I like to research cities. And actually through sharing these images, which I found on researching cities all over the world, I could share the things that I found with everyone around the world through social media. So it's the before-after project is a mapping project, and already has more than 3,000 images, and it's constantly growing, and it's a collaborative project. The project is, the main goal of the project is to open the eyes of the people. In this really one of our favorite examples in Budapest, this underpass was changed into a very people-friendly street. This is a very surprising example in Suwon in South Korea, where this huge avenue with parking is actually constructed on what once used to be a river. So the river was rediscovered, actually. And also from Korea, this is like a main highway, which you can imagine. I mean, how can you change this to become a more people-friendly place? So it was transformed into a linear boulevard, kind of esplanade, a park where people can just walk and experience the river. So these images are very inspiring, and we see these images and we start imagining how we can also change the places where we live. Here's an example of an overpass removal. This one is in Rio. And actually this is a project that was done for the Olympics, so now there's a light rail and a pedestrian esplanade there. This one is also an overpass removal, but it's also about the introduction of a light rail at the same time. So this is in Paris. And not only was the overpass removed and there's a tram, there's also like a bike lane, and everything has been changed. And this image almost looks like a render. It almost looks not real, but it's taken from street view. So it's reality. There's a lot of examples of pedestrian zones. This one in Mexico, just to a pedestrian zone. This one in Sao Paulo. You can see all the people and the cars all mixed together. So now it's a pedestrian zone. And this is an example of shared spaces. So before this was kind of like a roundabout. This is in London. And now it became a shared space. What is a shared space? It's an area where the cars enter, but the car is a guest to the space. So it has to kind of negotiate with the people walking there. They have the, it's not that the car has priority. And so you can see it, the space has been totally transformed. This is another shared street. This is in Auckland, New Zealand. So you can see it's one surface. There's no difference between the sidewalk and the road. So it's just one equal surface, and it's a whole shared zone. And bicycle lanes. So even in very famous locations like this one, they've introduced a bicycle lane in London. And now for some local examples for you to know better. So this is an example here. So actually, in this case, the left sidewalk was made even, actually, it became smaller because of a bike lane. But on the right lane, there's seating. It's wider, and there's new furniture like lamps and benches and bicycle racks. This is another example here. So very car-oriented, very dominant. So it even looks older because they used the cobblestones, and it looks like this was there before, but actually the before was a totally asphalt and car-dominant situation. In this case, I would like you to notice, it seems like there's a lot of green, but this green doesn't really have a function. So usually when we show these transformations, there's always someone commenting, oh, but they took away the green, they took away the trees. And that's true. We should include more green in the new transformations, but at the same time, they should have function. So before, the green just functioned like as a traffic island in a way. And now it's in an area where there could be a market, or there could be different activities happening here. Another example in Prague. And this is another example, a totally car-infested area. Just became clearer. Some of the transformations are very simple. They're just, instead of having, they're more kind of a traffic and a road safety issue. So now I'll talk specifically about temporary transformation, and specifically in a methodology using 3 different phases. So At Urb-i, we use a lot these phases, and the first phase that we think is important is the ephemeral phase. This case is in Times Square in New York. Also, David Sim talked about it a bit yesterday. So what they did is just put a few cones, and they bought like beach chairs and spread out beach chairs. So it's a very simple, very cheap, and it can be like for one day or even a few months. It's just kind of characterized as an event. And the next phase is a temporary one. So the temporary phase can be there for 2 to 5 years. And it's called temporary because you can undo it. So you use light material, painting, and plants, and you can even fix some benches. But at the same time, you're not doing anything which cannot be undone. So it's this phase serves as an experiment and a test. So the people in this phase, you can ask the people, what do you think of the transformation? So instead of asking them, do you like before the transformation? If you would ask the people beforehand, what do you think if we would transform this place? They will not really know how to answer this and how to imagine it. But if you do this kind of transformation, you can just ask them, how do you feel in this space now? So it's in this time you do a lot of observation and a lot of seeing how the people actually respond to it. And if the population accepts it, you can move on to the permanent phase, which is a real like infrastructural change. So instead of going directly to the permanent, we first test it, and then we see we can also change the design while we're testing it. So this methodology is very it's very useful because you're testing it and getting feedback from the people and testing it again, and that's how you can before you actually spend a lot of money in the permanent transformation, then you can already test it and change it and be more prepared to do the big investment. So here are a few examples of the ephemeral phase. So this is in Times Square that I mentioned, that they just put cones and they just spread out beach chairs, and it was a huge success. So this is how it all started. This is an example from Sao Paulo, again, Avenida Paulista, which you saw on the street view before. So every Sunday it's closed for cars, and it's an open street. And there's a double bike lane, and it's really always full of people and activities and music, and this is every Sunday. Yesterday, Jacek showed also this project in Warsaw. So it's another more kind of nearer to here. It's also the same example. Yeah, the text is kind of cut there, but you can still manage to read it. This is an example here in Brno. And this is also nearby. But this is an event which happens more in summer, I think, in České Budějovice. And I think these events, they shouldn't only happen in summer, because we shouldn't see them as events only. Because we often treat them as individual events, but not as a strategy to make things. So I think we should, when we do these ephemeral events, we should use them as a strategy to later implement more permanent. So we test something in order for later to make more permanent changes. So I'd like to show some ephemeral transformations that we did at Urb-i. This is a simulation of a new, like the whole thing was asphalt, just kind of a roundabout. And now it's we simulated the project that another architect from designed, just by the lines and painting and creating some activity for that day, for one day only. This example, we actually occupied 10 parking spots on 2 blocks, and we just painted and put grass, and there was a band. This is another one of maybe 2 or 3 parking spaces, and this is parking day. It's just putting grass on one parking lot, one parking space, and doing an activity. But there's one example that we did, which we managed to do the ephemeral and the temporary. So this project in Sao Paulo actually started as a competition that we participated in 2014. And so we imagined the temporary phase to be like this in the competition, just painting and putting some plants. And later, that this can turn into a permanent phase. So like being a shared street, as I showed before, with new pavement and taking away all the electricity posts and just doing a total transformation. But we managed to do the ephemeral phase. So last year, on Car Free Day, there was an event there, and they put grass on the whole street, and they had food trucks, and it was quite a big success. And this year happened again, only that this year we managed to approve the temporary phase. So this is last year as well. Oh yeah, we explained to the population, to the people passing by, we explained the project, the process, and this year we managed to approve a temporary. Only that this photo is from Monday, so actually it's very new. I didn't even get to go to the inauguration because I was here. So it's just been inaugurated on Sunday, and we managed to finally have our first project, which got approved in the temporary phase. So it used to be like this. As you can, at the end of the street, there's a train station, a very busy, and a lot of people come out of the train station with massive numbers, but it's a very short street, so the cars hardly pass there. So people just walk in the middle of the street, because the sidewalks, not only are they're really tiny, they're full of posts, like electricity and just obstacles. So people just prefer to walk in the middle of the street. So now we managed to create more space for the pedestrians. So here are a few more examples. Again, Times Square that I showed you, but here's a photo of how it looks on the ground. There's a painted, and they already changed the furniture, so there's like proper chairs and chairs and tables. This is a closer example in Krakow, which is pretty recent. So they also painted the same method. And here are some more examples. This one from New York. So some of before after. So how it was before, and how it is now. So it's very simple. And this is in Seattle. Before, just totally asphalt. And now. And this one in Chicago I like because they managed to join the sidewalk and the asphalt bit with one kind of pattern, so you see what's of pedestrians. This one in Mexico, it's much safer to cross the road here. And this one in Sao Paulo, again, they just took one of the lanes. It's very similar to the one we did because the transport authority, they only approved the green color, so we couldn't do it in a more lively color. No, this is in Liberdade, in the Japan town. So here's an example in Prague, actually. In this case, I mean, I don't know so much the story behind it, but part of the road was closed, so I mean, they took away all the lines and the cars, but that's basically the only change they've made. So I was asking myself, why couldn't they go one step further and do something like this? For example, paint it, and then other activities could pop up, because it's basically the same and it's testing this phase. And while you test it, you can better prepare for a permanent phase. So actually, I was searching on the internet. I don't know if this is what has got approved, but I found that this is the permanent project. Well, I think the testing phase can serve as a time where you can test out these different variations for a permanent project. yeah, actually it's kind of cut, but the name of the architect. So I'd like now to talk about Brno. So yesterday there were lots of guests talking about their own city and their experiences in their own city. And I wanted to do something a bit different and not talk only about Sao Paulo and the experiences there. I wanted to do something which is a bit more kind of relevant to the people here. But they're actually my perception of the way I saw Brno. So a lot of this analysis I've done before I came, so just used Google Maps and Street View. And while I was here, I walked around the city and kind of complemented what I saw from above or from virtual to the real life. So the city is divided into different typologies. And the first typology is the city center. So it looks like this. You all know it very well. In the city center, we actually have the open spaces. The public space is the open space. So even if we go into the little alleyways behind the buildings or inside the buildings, they're usually public, I've noticed. I've walked through quite a few little alleys that go inside buildings and outside, and they're all public. So there's a mixed use and high density, and it's a very good definition of public space. Between the built space and the open space, there's a very good definition. And as you can see, all the shops are on the ground floor, so there's a direct entrance. And this is important because later you will see in other typologies that it's not like that. And it's a place where all the residents of the city meet. It's very people-friendly, and there's all these activities happening. And people of all ages, and it's a very friendly environment. So the second typology, the inner city, which maybe a lot of you live in, I'm assuming, because I think in the city center, less people actually live there, but maybe I'm wrong. So it looks like this, so these really big blocks. And what I've noticed is that there are a lot of open spaces which are not public. So the open space is not necessarily public. Of course, the streets are public, but there's a lot of open space which is not public. And we don't perceive this while we're walking on the street, because when we're walking on the street, we don't really know what's behind the buildings, but we do feel like we're walking quite long distances from each street to street. But still, there's a good definition of the public space. Also, a lot of the ground floor is inadequate for commercial use. So, for example, in this case, if you wanted to open some retail or some shop, you will not be able to, because it's just, there's either half a story under or it's too high. And however, the cars occupy all the space. So even on the corners where the people are supposed to cross, the cars have been, well, they're parking on the actual sidewalk. And they're invading, the cars kind of are invading all the space. And this is even legal because they've done a line further into the sidewalk. And so everywhere we look, we see like the car has a very dominant character. But at the same time, there's a lot of very people-friendly areas. And then I walked to this square here, and there was very good quality, public space, very well designed. However, I've noticed that it's kind of in a traffic island, so it was like a triangle. And the problem with this is when you have a good public space, that it's not adjacent to a building, that the building can't open like a cafe or restaurant which opens into the public space. So this is a good public space, but it's isolated. And I've seen other examples. And returning to the question of the commerce, the retail on the ground floor, a lot of places I've noticed that it's been adapted. So for example here, I don't know exactly if the original was like the left side, but it looks like some shops have opened, and where other times maybe there was no shop. I don't know, because it doesn't look like a shop typology. In this case, it looks like there was some, well, as it is, as it is higher, that there was some adaptation to open a shop where it wasn't actually meant to be retail. So this is actually good, because it's better to have retail and to have activities than not to have. But at the same time, it wasn't planned for it. And sometimes there's this, not the laser. So sometimes there's shops, like there's a restaurant on like the second floor, but the ground floor is totally kind of inaccessible. And what I've noticed is that there's on these avenues where the trams pass, that you have to walk really long distances to cross from where you're allowed to cross to the other side. And yesterday in the lecture, David Sim talked a lot about this, and he even gave that example of jumping, like you can do it in bits, if anyone remembers this. But I have to say that I was pretty impressed, and that the city is very well connected with public transportation. So the trams go everywhere, and they even go to the outer city. So in the outer city, it's much less dense. I mean, you can imagine there's less mixed use, less retail, less mix of uses. It's very monofunctional, very residential. But still, there's quite a good definition of the space. You can feel like the houses are aligned, and there's a good definition of public space. But it's also well connected, I found. And the tram system here is very good, and tram and bus system, so it goes even to the outer city. However, again, it's still very car dominated. And another typology is what I call the modernist style, but it's basically where buildings are loosely into the public space. So all public space here, all the open space is public, and actually there's too much public space in this type of typology. And from the ground, I mean, there's no good definition of public space, and it's usually people-less. And another typology is the brownfield and new development areas. For example, near the train station, there's a shopping center, and there's all these empty spaces and industrial areas. And they have a lot of ambiguous spaces, kind of a residual public space that don't really, it looks like it's left over, or something was demolished and there's something left over. And there's large, really big, large-scale uses, and between them create all these ambiguous spaces for the pedestrians, for the people. I found there's a lot of visual pollution in form of advertisement, because these areas are kind of not well defined, so there's a lot of kind of blind facades which have all these advertisements on them. And as you go out of the shopping center, you just suddenly, there's a field and there's an undeveloped area. So it's very kind of all these mixture between different types of developments. And there's a lot of residual space, and a lot of it is used for parking for cars. I also found some pop-up uses. So as these areas are not really well defined, so they have some space for some pop-up uses to pop up, and they could be anything, and it could be temporary also. And there's a mix of random uses, like new and old and leftover, and all these spaces. Even there's some typologies where they're very urban, but they're kind of lost in the context. So it's a very urban typology in the middle of this context. However, there's also some more people-friendly designed areas in kind of these areas. And finally, the typology of shopping centers. I actually didn't go and visit shopping centers, but I looked at all of them from above. And it seemed like on the outskirts of the city, there's a lot of big shopping centers, kind of suburban style shopping centers with a lot of parking. This one looks very North American style in a way. I mean, from above at least. And if you look on the ground, there's even no sidewalk, so you cannot come here if you don't have a car. So they're 100% used for car. There's no definition at all of public space, and they're very people-less. I mean, the people are all inside the shopping malls, and they suck out the activity from the, I don't know if the city center, but probably from the outer city. But I also found another shopping center which does seem to have thought about pedestrian activity and sidewalks. So to finish off the presentation, how can we inspire change? At Urb-i, we often do collaborative design challenges. This is a nice way to involve anyone that wants to make changes, but also to do incentive on creativity. So, for example, the last challenge, we chose this square in Rio, and we gave this image, and we told the people that they can design anything. And we received 17 proposals. So I'll show you a few of them really quick, but I won't comment on the actual designs. So I think we really incentivize doing an incentive on creativity, and also this is a way, as I've seen most of your architects, that can help inspire other people. So what about Brno? I took this place randomly. It's not that this specific space has to have this transformation, and I thought, how can this be transformed? So it's only an exercise of the imagination, and it's for inspiration. So why don't we add some color? And even though it's impossible in this typology to add retail and shops on the ground floor, let's add them anyway. And add the people. So I hope that the architects can use all this information and be inspired to inspire also. Thank you.